So the tough thing about a narcissistic relationship is the impossibility of it, because it's sort of I want to break up with the narcissist. I want to cut ties with them, but I don't want them to get mad, and I don't want them to be hurt, and I just want it to be okay, and I don't want it to mess up my kids, and I don't want it to mess up my family, and I don't have another job lined up, and I'm still not sure what to do. Okay, right there, that whole, and I wanted this, and I don't want that, and I want it to be this, and I don't want that right there. That is one of the questions, asks, hopes that I hear most from survivors. It's sort of like a sandwich. Like, I know this is not healthy. I don't want to have to keep interacting with it anymore. I do have empathy or maybe sympathy or maybe pity for them. I'm also afraid of what they're going to do. I want to protect everyone. I'm kind of scared of them, and I don't want to mess my life up too much. And it's all true, and it's reasonable to want it, but there's no way to get it. There are two paths forward once you sense and once you see that the narcissistic relationship is the mess that it is. And that one is that it will always be psychologically harmful and hurtful and painful, and you will never be seen and heard. And maybe they'll see and hear you for a minute if it's a performative thing to keep you from leaving. And you leave, and it's messy, and you stay, and it's always going to be unsatisfying and repeatedly break your heart. And this is a bad example because it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of all the emotion and the history and the nervous system stuff you feel and the body stuff you feel and the realistic fears raised by a narcissistic relationship or being from a narcissistic family. Think about trying to purchase a home. Unless you are very wealthy, you know what you want, you compromise on most of it, and you live with it, right? You want 2 stories, you get 1. You want a small yard, you get carpet instead of wood floors, right? The difference is that the house we have to compromise on doesn't manipulate us, betray us, or yell at us. There is no version of leaving a narcissistic relationship that they don't want you to leave that is smooth or regulated or normal. Sure, I get it. Every breakup or stepping back from a relationship has some hurt feelings. But what happens after a narcissistic relationship ends or someone pulls out of it a little bit goes way beyond just hurt feelings. It is vengeance, manipulation, smear campaigns, and intergenerational harm. You have to weigh out and do impossible math, such as, will my children be more harmed by observing an emotionally abusive marriage and the ongoing narcissistic abuse that maybe I could protect them from if we're all in the same house, or by a parent who, when they're with them alone, tells them terrible things and manipulates them after our divorce? Will my kids be harmed by not having contact with my parents and having an extended family and grandparents because I went no contact, and then have to hear from cousins and family gatherings that I was being mean and holding them back from grandma? You have to do calculations that not even law enforcement is able to do. How harmful will this be if I step back or end it? How badly will they escalate? Will it just be social media tantrums, or will they explode at me in a dangerous way? How bad will it be for my vulnerable narcissistic partner, who will likely just fade into nothing and become depressed and stop caring for themselves because of all of their abandonment issues, and I'm no longer there to keep their lives and the trains running on time? The only time a narcissistic relationship ending even goes a little bit smooth, and not even really, is when they leave you. And in an intimate relationship, they will leave you only if they've secured new supply. They found someone else. So that's not going to feel good for you. And if you don't understand narcissism yet, and you aren't ready for this relationship to end, and you want to be in a relationship and you still love them, or whatever your reasons are, now you're living in the abject grief of having been left and a very live trauma bond. So you're suffering. But that's not what this video is about. It's the many people who finally see it clearly. You may not even be trauma bonded, but you want out. and you realize there's no getting out of this without it being a disaster. To leave a narcissistic relationship feels like crossing the Rubicon. You blow up your life, and it feels like there is no going back. That's actually not entirely true. Sometimes it's true, but it definitely feels that way when you're in the middle of making these so-called choices. Those conditions and those deals you make with yourself, you wonder, is there a way to leave that isn't so dramatic? Is there an optimal time to do it? Can I slowly introduce the idea of leaving? Can I wait until the kids get to a certain age? These can all feel like the bargaining aspects of grief. Well, maybe it will be easier if this or that happens. It won't be easier. Listen, healthy people break up all the time. And the difference is that healthy people, yes, they're well regulated, but also they may share the reasons for the why of the breakup. Maybe one person wants to break up more, so sure, any breakup is always going to be a little bit easier for one person than another. But these aren't breakups about someone betraying the other and leaving, but two people who recognize that, we want different things, we're not spending a lot of time together, or one wants a child and the other doesn't, or one wants to have one lifestyle and the other one doesn't. Whatever it is, there may be tears, but then people go their own way, maybe in some cases even remain friends. And it is hard for both of them because there may still be a fondness, but there's also wisdom. I'll tell you this, a narcissistic relationship breakup ain't that. But in a narcissistic relationship, there's no talking about why. You are having two very different experiences. You may actually view them as a partner and someone you love and want, or at least at one time wanted to spend time with, that you wanted to build or share a life with, or even a family member that you wanted to have a loving, trusting, sustained relationship with, shared, compassionate, empathic, respectful, mutual. But the narcissistic person instead viewed you as supply, to serve them, ideally to not inconvenience them or ask anything of them, but to always do things for them, to read their mind, to do what they want, and act as a sort of pacifier that they could rage at or yell at, and they could punish you, and you would still be there afterwards and never hold them accountable because they got their angry feelings out, so let's not talk about that anymore. Narcissistic folks often struggle with either a sense of abandonment, and we tend to see this more in vulnerable narcissism, or rage in the face of losing supply and control. Especially we see this in malignant narcissism, but pretty much in all other types too. So you getting up and leaving is either going to leave them spiraling in despair or coming at you with rage and punishment. And they will punish you in every way and get that control back. And that can involve smear campaigns, involving your children and telling them things they shouldn't be talking about, or harming your reputation. So let's go back to the question. Dr. RAMANI, is there a way for me to end or disengage from this narcissistic relationship and make it all smooth? And the answer is no, not really. And sometimes, folks, the risk of leaving a narcissistic relationship is genuine danger. And that has to be part of the calculation as well. And sometimes, and more often, frankly, it is the discomfort you feel about someone else's despair and that they're falling apart. Especially if you have pretty much had the role of keeping the narcissistic person held together all these years by being a fixer and a helper and a caregiver in every way. Not only was that never thanked, they actually believed that they were the grown-up in the relationship. Now, when you wait for all the stars to line up, this too is part of the trauma-bonded situation of it all, because the stars are never all going to line up. And as a result, you will spend your life in eternal stuckness. There is no version of this where the narcissistic person will be okay with the breakup. I have actually known of cases where the partner, the not narcissistic partner in the narcissistic relationship, tried to bring their narcissistic partner into spaces where they could meet attractive people so that the narcissistic partner would then have new supply and leave. When you do it that way, it rarely works. Somehow they only cheat on us when we don't want them to. And then the new person will distract them. Your hope is that the new person will distract them so that your narcissistic partner will leave. That's rom-com stuff. It never happens like that in real life. The stars don't line up. And so people feel impossibly stuck. And feeling stuck in one of these relationships is like feeling imprisoned, and it definitely makes it much harder to heal. So instead of stuckness, it's important to have clarity and a bit of courage, and to remember a few fundamental truths. Number one, the stars are not going to line up. There will be no perfect moment to leave. It will be a mess if you leave and they don't want you to. Whether it is a mess because you feel horribly guilty about leaving a vulnerable narcissist, or a mess because you're afraid of what they're going to do, or a mess because of the interpersonal smear campaign manipulation they will do, can you radically accept that it's going to be a mess? Also, is it dangerous to leave? You have to ask that question, because if so, then that's actually beyond the scope of this video. And we will have information on domestic violence resources here for you to turn to in the video notes. Are your fears financial? Ask yourself hard questions. Are you willing to significantly drop your quality of life? Or would the financial stuff be so bad that you would not be able to acquire any safe place to live? Have you done the exercise of doing a realistic budget? How much would your kids have to give up? Can you transition back to work or make more money in your job or get a side gig? What are these financial fears, and can you consider meeting with a financial advisor or an accountant on your own about that? I can promise you one thing, you will get screwed financially in a narcissistic divorce. That's a fact. The bigger question is, how much can you realistically live on? Don't get lost in what is fair. Pay attention to what could work. Fairness is not a thing in narcissistic relationships. And in fact, that sense of injustice takes a massive toll in the healing and grief process. But maybe the greatest justice is you don't have to be in this relationship anymore. Then the next question is, are your fears for your children? If this is a divorce, this is real. Talk to a divorce attorney or find a local program that can get you low-cost legal care. Many domestic violence programs have them that can get you free legal advice. Many states are automatically going to strive for 50-50 custody, and narcissism and gaslighting will not be reasons that custody would be less than 50-50. If the narcissistic parent asks for it, in most cases, they will get it. This means exploring your feelings about this in therapy or in support groups of people going through this. Some folks may say, I don't want my children having to be the ones having to deal with their victimized, angry parent alone, and that may hold you back from leaving. So that's okay, then you're clear on your why. And that also means simultaneously radically accepting that the patterns in the relationship won't change, and then being clear on your why for why you're not leaving the relationship. Others leave because they hate that this is the model of a relationship that they're giving their child. And remember, many narcissistic folks will mount up a dramatic custody battle, if for no other reason but to stick it to you. But it wasn't about the kids for them. It might very well just be about the win. And if you can white knuckle the process, the narcissistic person may actually get bored. And while on paper they may have 50-50 custody, you may find yourself with way more than 50-50 time with your kids. Yes, you won't get all the dollars, you won't get all the child support money to which you're entitled to. None of this is fair, but what you wanted was time with your kids. Or is your issue about going no contact with a family of origin, or going no contact with one of your parents, or trying to protect them from in-law, grandparents, or any of that? But what if the kids want those relationships? The bottom line, and this is uncomfortable, having had a narcissistic parent will affect your child, having that parent. And there's no sidestepping that. It comes down to a matter of level. Typically, the more severe the narcissistic parent's behavior and the more involved they are in the child's life, the worse the effects. Yes, the child would feel abandoned by a narcissistic parent if the narcissistic parent just left or does their own thing and rarely comes around or never comes around. And the child being constantly criticized and shamed and feeling that they can't step out of the lines without the parent's vengeance. These are two different burdens, but they are both burdens. The psychology of your child and the role they have in the family matters. And 3 different kids with the same narcissistic parent can not only have 3 very different experiences, they will have 3 very different outcomes. Another issue would be that does the toxic boss you're trying to figure things out with have the power and the ability to wreak havoc with your career? That's real. And meeting with mentors and other advisors in the field can matter. Can you afford to take a pay cut? Are you willing to work at a less prestigious place in the same industry to get away from this person? Is the company big enough for you to make an internal move within the company? Do you have to have a new job to leave this one, or can you make ends meet for a few months? By and large, toxic bosses and colleagues tend to stay and last in jobs longer than healthy people. In other words, you will not outlast them. And jobs aren't marriages or going no contact with a parent. Those things have much more primal meaning to us. But money and careers that we worked long and hard for, that you might have spent years getting an education for, there is meaning to those things. And you may not be able to parachute out of a job right away, but in most cases, HR departments will not help in these situations. Toxic stuff is just too vague for them. And while you may look back at having been at a highly esteemed white glove employer and having left for something smaller, or even to do your own thing, I promise you this, there won't be a day that you aren't relieved. This boss or colleague toxic workplace thing, while not easy, can be a little easier. And if the toxic boss goes after you or harms your reputation and you have some documentation, then there may actually be some legal remedies that you could speak with an employment or a labor law attorney about. And all of this means that you can look at, and I hate calling it staying, it's sort of like having to give in to sticking it in the relationship, as it were. You can more easily, because many people do stay. But as I said, they're staying with open eyes, and they're stuck staying, which isn't staying, it's just feeling stuck. Once you realize that you are staying in contact with the narcissistic family, or remaining in the marriage for now, or even the job, because you recognize that the smear campaign, or the harm to the kids, or the financial hit, or the always having to sleep with one eye open of it all is not where you are at right now, then this is not you being a doormat or living perpetually in your hazy trauma-bonded universe. But you thought it out for now. Like anything, you can revisit this decision about staying. Kids grow up. You may gain more financial freedom. With time, you may not give a damn about the smear campaign anymore. Radical acceptance is the eye-opener. You get out of the idea or the illusion that there is a smooth path forward that somehow you're not able to see. That path doesn't exist. And don't get me wrong, there can be lots of grief at this juncture as you're trying to make these decisions. That one more day of not feeling empathy or not being heard or enduring the same jabs over and over again just feels like existential dread. But the radical acceptance is a wake-up call, and the taking of responsibility, where we can get therapy with someone who gets this and doesn't tell you to work on boundaries and communication. We can cultivate some healthy relationships. We can bring daily practices and hobbies and experiences into our lives that feel meaningful and that belong solely to us. We can focus on our true norths, recognizing that you really are always a single parent when you're co-parenting in a narcissistic relationship. And on top of that, you're a single parent who is always being subverted. Your true north may be your children, volunteer work, friends, a garden, beloved pets. And all of these things may be a solace to you when and if you leave the relationship and have to endure the messes that come up afterwards. Is sticking around or staying in a narcissistic relationship ever satisfying? Not really, no. The relationship will always be stressful and inane and unsatisfying and hurtful. If it's your parent, you may stick it out until the parent dies and not look back once they do. If it's a partner, you may attempt to create a fuller life outside of the relationship, but kind of no longer listen to them. But will there be a flatness in that area of your life and long-term grief? Yes, there will. And if you do leave and it is a mess, and it will be a mess, hopefully you are more prepared. It won't feel good, but it won't be a surprise. It's like a roller coaster. You don't think it's a train that goes around on a flat track. You feel the click, 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 click as the car gets pulled steeply up the track, and you know the big drop is coming. The big difference is that the roller coaster is fun. But if you didn't know the big drop was coming, it would shock the hell out of you. Shock isn't good for you. A narcissistic breakup or going no contact or disengaging from a family means getting prepared. Whether that's legal, psychotherapeutic, friends, support communities, education, because you already know how this relationship works. You may not want to know it, but you know it. You know it in your body. And your fears and your worries feel very real because they are. Even that fear of watching or hearing that the narcissistic person is falling apart. A mother who keeps crying because you don't come around anymore or you don't call her every day. And how could you leave her high and dry after all she did for you? Or a narcissistic ex who is sliding into depression or relapses into addiction and is not doing well and crying all the time. That, for many survivors, may be one of the most overwhelming fears of all in all of this. Our fears, should a relationship end, of anger, abandonment, conflict, those fears keep people stuck in these relationships. And it's a manipulation that narcissistic people play beautifully. Their anger is always just around the next corner, right under the surface. That stuff, those fears of conflict and abandonment, that's the stuff we can work on our own. Our fears around those things like fear and conflict may relate to early environments, and that the rage crackling through any room feels like calamity in our bodies. And working on all of that becomes important because we may be stuck in the terrible transaction of enduring an unhealthy relationship so we don't have to potentially be left or experience conflict. That hope of ending a narcissistic relationship without conflict or rage or ending it peacefully or fairly are simply not possible. Again, that's another piece of radical acceptance. And the big question to grapple with is, are you willing to stay in a toxic cycle in a relationship because you are afraid of conflict and anger? Maybe the answer to that is yes. And if it is, then be clear on that with yourself. But when we bring these insights into the sunlight, we say, huh? That's why I'm staying? And when you have that moment, you can open up to a different conversation within yourself. The stars aren't going to line up if you want to leave one of these relationships. And all you can do is really explore what this means. Because many people keep waiting for miracles or a magical moment that will somehow give them some sort of metaphysical answer. It doesn't work that way. I have watched people wasting lifetimes, waiting for miracles that come, waiting for a sign. We lose so much of ourselves to these relationships already. It's important you take your time and chart your course, but also see it clearly. If you're going to stick it out and stay in one of these relationships, make sure that you aren't stuck staying, but rather you're staying with your eyes clearly open. If you leave, ultimately, assuming that you can leave and be physically safe, okay, someday it'll be better, but for a period of time, it will be deeply unsettling. Will it feel fair? No. Will it be easy? No. But clarity may be the only miracle we have in these situations. It's painful to give up on the hope of a love story or of a loving family, of a successful career, of growing old with someone. It's not about giving these hopes up. It's about revising them. And that takes time and a willingness to open yourself up to your reality in a way that's informed by how unchangeable this personality style is and the realities of the world that we are in. As a therapist, one of the hardest things as I speak to groups, as I take questions, as I work with clients, is, isn't there a way to make this more fair? Help me, help me. I want to leave, but I don't want them to get mad. I'm like, you're asking for, that's not on the menu. And I think for any of us who do this work, the hardest thing is people get it, they see it, they know it'll be better if they could get out. They want to get out smoothly. And that is so hard for folks I know who work helping people through family court, for folks I know who work with all kinds of severities of narcissistic relationships. We don't have a magic wand that makes it easy to leave. We can validate your experience. We can tell you what's happening is real. But sadly, we would be doing you a disservice to say, oh yeah, you could leave this. You found your path. You can leave and this will be easy. It'll never be easy. And I've told many clients, if I were to tell you how hard this is going to be, you're never going to leave. And many times they'll say, if you had told me, Dr. Ramani, how hard this is going to be, and now that I'm in the middle of it, I definitely probably wouldn't have. But I'm grateful I did, because they do get through to the other side. Every situation is different, and you're often weighing out a lot of factors, a lot of which I try to lay out in this video. So I hope this sort of helps you do a self-study into your situation. If you stay, that you don't stay, but you clear stay and say, okay, for now, I see what I'm staying in. Recognize that nothing stays the same, especially when kids are involved, forever. But to assess your situation and make decisions in it that work for you, but in a way that allows you to see it clearly, and also lifts this idea that should you decide to disengage, go no contact, leave the relationship, that it's never going to be a smooth path forward. Only you know what you can bear. But the issue is seeing it clearly. Thanks again.